I just happened to pick up this book, which is Mr. Sharma's ISC Physics. Now, this isn't really bedtime reading. This is a very thick book. There are hundreds and hundreds of pages. In fact, it goes up to page 1084. Not really bedtime reading. You couldn't hold it up. Now, this is the physics you have to know for class 11. Isn't it a bit frightening to realize that you have to know and understand a 1078-page book just for physics? And when I picked this up, I was all a bit horrified. But what I was actually intending to talk to you about today is projectiles. And so I looked up projectiles in this big book, and I come to page 204, and it says projectiles. And I read through it, and I suddenly realized why this book is so thick. It's so thick because it gives a lot of worked examples. On each chapter, there are loads and loads of worked examples. And that's what makes the book so thick. The actual physics is quite small, but the book appears big because of all the worked examples. There's an English expression, you can't see the wood for the trees, meaning you can't see the big picture because there's so much detail. Now, what I want to say to you, first of all, before I begin to talk about projectiles, what I want to say to you is the way to approach a big, thick book like this is to extract from it the essential bits, the essential principles of physics. You don't have to learn the whole book. Most of the book are worked examples. Now, in the beginning, when I looked at this enormous book, I thought, how terrible. But as I read the book, I realized it's actually rather a good book. The problem is, the presentation isn't very good. It's quite difficult out of here to work out what is the important principle and what are just worked examples, vast numbers of equations and all this sort of thing. But the content is actually very good. And if you go through the book and pick out the necessary principles of physics, ignore the worked examples for the moment, then you could condense this book into a book about 1/10 of the size, 100 pages instead of 1,000 pages. And what I suggest you should do as your revision is go through the book and pick out the essential facts that you need to know and make your own little book on note paper, and you will find everything you need to know about projectiles can be contained on one sheet of paper, and I'll show you that a bit later. If we go through this book, we see a whole lot of calculations, algebra, but they end in a result, a final equation. It's the final equation that you really need to know. So when you get this thick book, don't feel you have to learn the whole lot. I see people walking along the road, revising for the exam, learning the whole book. That's not the way to do it. What you should do is pick out the essential bits and then make your own notes in your own notebook. And just use this then for looking at a few worked examples. Now, what I want to talk about today is a thing called projectiles. It's on your class 11 syllabus, and you'll find it on page 204 of Mr. Sharma's thick book of physics. What is a projectile? A projectile is something that is set moving, and then it continues moving with only one force acting on it, and that is the force of gravity. If I take my pen and just project it through the air, once it has left my hand, Once it has left my hand, it moves through the air. I'll do that again. It moves through the air with only one force. Once it's left my hand, it's moving through the air. There's only one force acting on it, and that's the downwards force of gravity. It moves through the air, only one force downwards. Now you may say, but there's another force, isn't there? You know, there's wind, there's air resistance. When this goes through the air is slowing it down. Well, in looking at the theory of projectiles, we actually make an approximation. We say, let's pretend there's no air resistance. That's quite a common thing to do in everyday life. We often make approximations. I've talked in other programs about Newton's laws of motion. Well, Newton's first, second, and third laws of motion are only approximately right. They are not the whole truth, because we've discovered that Einstein, with his theory of relativity, showed that Newton's laws of motion are only a small part of the truth. They are only approximate. But for many everyday purposes, that approximation is quite okay. So we're going to approximate. In all our talk about projectiles, we are going to assume that there is no air resistance slowing the thing down. If I look at my pen, it's quite aerodynamic. As it goes through the air like that, there isn't much air resistance. A bullet going through the air, not much air resistance. So ignore air resistance. We assume air resistance is zero. So when this pen leaves my hand, having been set in motion, it travels through the air, and there's only one force acting on it, which is a downwards force of gravity. And I'll say a little bit more about that if somebody can find my pen again for me. If we were to draw a free body diagram of the forces acting on my pen, the only force we have to show in this downwards, in this free body diagram, is the force of gravity acting downwards. Just first of all, a word about one or two things that are not projectiles and why they aren't projectiles. If I could have my aeroplane, if we think of an aeroplane flying along, is that a projectile? No. Why not? Because there is more than one force acting on the aeroplane. There is the force of gravity pulling it down, but we get lift from the wings going through the air, which holds it up, and we get thrust from the jet engines, pushing it forward. So this is not a projectile, because it is not acted on by only one force, the force of gravity. It's acted on by three forces: the forward thrust of the engines, and the lift on the wings, plus the force of gravity down. So it's not a projectile. There is actually a fourth force as well, which is air resistance as the thing goes very fast through the air. So an aeroplane in flight isn't a projectile, but you may say, what happens if both the engines stop? It's going along, both the engines stop, whoops, starts to come down. It still isn't a projectile, because even though the engines have stopped and we don't have a forward thrust of the engines, we have lift from the wings still. So it's not a projectile. So I'm not going to flick that out. What about a Diwali rocket, a firework, a rocket? Well, if we think of a firework set off, light blue touch paper, stand back, and the rocket goes...
Grab it.
You see the gases coming out of the back. It's not a projectile because there is a force of gravity acting down, but there is also a forward thrust from the gases coming out of the back of the rocket, which is pushing the rocket upwards. So there are two forces acting on the rocket. So it isn't a projectile. When I fire this from my hand like this, I just give it a bang, and when it's going through there, there are no other forces except gravity acting on it. Push, thus. And if I send it vertically upwards, still, on its flight, there are no other forces except gravity. So, a projectile is something that moves with only one force acting on it, that is, the force of gravity. Let's go and look at one or two typical examples of projectiles. And we are sitting here in the officers' mess of the Royal Bodyguard Regiment at Detchencholing, and very kindly they have put out on the grass for me an anti-aircraft gun, which fires a bullet up into the air, hoping to hit an aircraft or a helicopter and bring it down. Let's go and look at this anti-aircraft gun. And remember, this thick, heavy book, what you need to know is only a tenth the size of this book, but you have to do the work of extracting the important bits.
Well, maybe that's good enough.
Right, so here we are with this gun here, courtesy of the Royal Bodyguard, and this gun is designed for shooting down aircraft and helicopters. Well, let's just think about what happens to the shell, the bullet, when it comes out of the gun. First of all, it's set in motion by gunpowder exploding in here, which accelerates the shell out through here. And now, once the shell comes out of here, it's a projectile. Because when it's come out, there's no push force acting on it. The only force acting on it is a downwards force of gravity. So it fulfills the condition for being a projectile. If the bullet comes out of here and the gun is horizontal, it'll come and it'll fall like that. The only force acting on the shell is the downwards force of gravity. Now, something rather strange you may not believe. It requires me to be a bit coordinated, which is a bit difficult. But imagine a shell, if you could see it, coming out of here, and get the camera to do it in slow motion. Imagine, there's the shell falling to the ground like that. Now imagine me holding a marble here. If I let go of the marble at exactly the same moment that the shell comes out of here, I let go of the marble falls straight to the ground. The force of gravity, the only force acting on the marble. Now the thing is this. The time taken for the marble to hit the ground is exactly the same as the time taken for the shell or the bullet to hit the ground here. If I could split the movement into sections, we would see that once the shell starts to fall, at every moment the shell is at the same level as the falling marble. Now, I'll try and draw that on a whiteboard in a moment, but the time taken for a marble to drop to the ground from here is the same as the time taken for the shell to hit the ground there. We can work out easily how long it takes the marble to fall. We can therefore work out how long it takes the bullet to hit the ground. But I did say this gun was designed for shooting down helicopters and aeroplanes. It wouldn't be much good if all it could do was shoot the bullet forwards. So this is designed so that it can fire at a variety of angles. So I can fire it up like this. And now we are getting projectile motion. The shell comes out, goes up, and then comes to the ground again. And you will have learned that the path of the shell, once it leaves the gun, is a parabola. And again, on a whiteboard, I'll talk about that a little bit more. A parabola. And I can alter the angle to aim for the aircraft. And of course, now it's going much higher, but it will hit the ground not so far away. You can ask yourself, what happens if I were to point this vertically upwards? The shell will go straight up into the air, going slower and slower and slower because of the force of gravity, and then it'll turn round and come down again and hit me on the head. Now, we're going to try that with an arrow fired from a bow. Firing an arrow straight up in the air from a bow, it's a bit dangerous, isn't it? Because if it turns around and comes down again, the person who fired the arrow may find that the arrow's coming down into the top of his head. So we need to be a bit careful about it. But use your imagination. Bang! The shell going up in a parabola and coming down like that. So, first example of things that are projectiles are bullets and shells fired from guns. And just as a matter of interest, if instead of using this to shoot down aeroplanes, I wanted this to shoot on a building a long way away, I have to set the angle so that I get the right range for the shell. And one thing that again we'll talk about, obviously if it's horizontal, it's going to hit the ground not very far away. Obviously if it's vertical, it'll come down and hit the ground exactly where it started from. So in between, it'll hit the ground further and further away, and then nearer and nearer and nearer as I go too vertical. The maximum range for this gun would be when the angle with the horizontal, here's the horizontal, when the angle with the horizontal is 45 degrees. And we can show that mathematically with the equations of motion. 45 degrees gives me the maximum horizontal range for this gun. And it's important to note that all our understanding of projectile motion is based on the three equations of motion that you've learned already in school. Number one, V equals U plus AT. Number two, S equals UT plus a half AT squared. And number three, V squared equals U squared plus 2AS. They are three equations that you need to commit to memory. And all of our projectile motion and all those calculations and equations in the textbook are all based on just those three equations. I mentioned when we were outside with the anti-aircraft gun that all motion of a projectile is controlled by these three equations of motion. V equals U plus AT, S equals UT plus a half AT squared, V squared equals U squared plus 2AS. Learn these off by heart. Now, you may find it a bit confusing. In your textbook, they may have different symbols. They may say V1 and V0, and instead of A, which stands for acceleration, they may say G, which is the acceleration due to gravity. Don't be confused by the fact that they are different letters. The basic formula are the same. Learn these off by heart. People have known about these equations since the days of Galileo. Galileo, in fact, worked out some of these equations. But do you know, amazingly, in a British artillery manual, that is to say a guide for firing a gun of 200 years ago, which is not very long ago, do you know what the path for the shell for the bullet that they showed in this manual was, they said that when the shell comes out of the gun, it goes like this. Boom! Like that. Now, can you imagine the shell goes, stops, and then drops to the ground? And yet that is what army officers 200 years ago thought happened when a shell left a gun. They didn't understand about projectiles, and they never thought of applying these equations to the motion of the shell or the bullet. Well, of course, that is absolute rubbish. What we know from looking at those equations is that the shell doesn't go like that, it goes like that. Now, the shape of this curve is called a parabola. And let's think a moment about why it goes in that shape. And I'm going to rub out the ground and the shell and the gun. I'm also going to rub out these equations because you have learned them off by heart. And the good way of learning equations is to make them like a poem. V equals U plus AT. S equals UT plus a half AT squared. V squared equals U squared plus 2AS. Learn them like a poem or a religious sentence. And then it's easy. But I'll try and explain why the bullet performs the way it does. And there's the bullet. Now, when the bullet leaves the gun, it's moving upwards, but it's also moving along. If it was not moving up, if the gun was firing exactly horizontally, the bullet would simply go like that. But what does the upward and downward movement make the bullet do? It's going up, it's being slowed all the time by gravity, and then it turns round and comes down again. Let's watch.
The velocity of the projectile varies from point to point. At each point, the velocity has components in the horizontal and vertical directions. The horizontal component of velocity remains unchanged throughout the flight. The vertical component of velocity continuously changes due to the force of gravity. Thus, the horizontal motion is a uniform motion, and the vertical motion is a uniformly accelerated motion.
And it's called, the shape of the curve is called a parabola. And from our equations of motion we had here, we can work out the equation of the parabola. If the bullet is fired straight up, it goes up and down. Go, up and down. If the bullet is fired at an angle, then it's got a horizontal movement as well. Up. If the bullet's going very fast, it'll go like that. If the bullet's going a bit slower, ready, up, down, and it'll come down there. Let's just look at the effect of how fast the bullet is travelling. If the gun is pointing horizontally, there's no upward or downward movement, the bullet just goes like that. It's not a projectile, because it's running along the ground, gravity isn't affecting it. But if we project it up into the air, it's acted on once it has left the gun. It is acted on only by the force of gravity, so therefore it is a projectile. Let's see what its path is. It's a combination, remember, of a vertical up and down movement under the force of gravity, plus a steady horizontal movement. And if there is no air resistance, this horizontal velocity is constant. It doesn't speed up or slow down in that direction. We're going to go up and down, and the bullet's going to be moving slowly in a horizontal direction. Fired up like that. Go. Down. Now, that's not very well done because I'm not very good at moving the marker at a steady speed horizontally. But I think you can get the idea. The combination of the upward and downward motion, up and down, plus the horizontal movement of my board writer gives us a path like that. It's called a parabola. From our three equations of motion that were here, we can work out the equation of the parabola, and we can see that if I increase the horizontal speed, then I get a different picture. Go. Down. And of course it's coming down here, and this chappie gets shot. So the range from here to here depends on the horizontal speed, and it depends on the angle that I shoot the bullet, because if I shoot the bullet like that, here's the y direction, there's the x direction. If I give it a velocity v, meters a second, and if I fire the gun at an angle of theta degrees, theta is a Greek letter, it's just a convenient symbol, theta degrees, then this movement of the bullet can be split into two combined movements, a horizontal movement plus a vertical movement. We've seen how a horizontal movement plus a vertical movement gives us a path like that. And if you remember your school trigonometry, the horizontal movement is v cosine theta, the vertical movement is v sine theta. So combine the vertical and the horizontal and I get a path like that. If I alter the angle theta, like that, then obviously the upward component is much bigger than the horizontal component. The path will be like that. If I make the angle theta smaller, then the horizontal component will be bigger than the vertical component, and I'll get a trajectory like this, and it'll go like that. To get the maximum range for the bullet, I want the angle theta to be 45 degrees. If it's bigger than 45 degrees, the bullet will go higher, but not so far. If it's less than 45 degrees, the bullet will go further, but not so high. The biggest distance, though, will be if I set it off at 45 degrees. But we'll look into that a little bit more. Let's go away from guns now and look at another sort of projectile which you see very frequently when you're playing around out of school. Let's go and look at a football. For a moment ago, there is an explosive charge that exerts a force on the bullet that pushes the bullet out of the gun. If we take the football, your foot is the equivalent of the gunpowder. Your foot is an explosive charge, and the impact of your foot on the ball gives the ball energy to sail up into the air. Now, let's see a really good parabola shape. I gather you call it a banana shot. So I want a really good banana shot. Watch the explosion as his foot kicks the ball. Then the ball leaves his foot. It sails through the air. The only force is the force of gravity downwards. Remember, we are ignoring air resistance. Force of gravity down. The ball performs a path, a beautiful parabola. Let's see your banana shot. So we've come here to the car wash in Tubber in order to look at another example of projectile motion, which is water coming out of a hose pipe. The water's pushed forwards by pressure from the pump, and so the water is coming out moving forwards. But if I angle the hose pipe, it goes up and forwards, and I get my very nice shape here, the parabola. Exactly the same shape followed by the bullet from a gun, exactly the same shape followed by a football in a banana kick, and here we can see the shape from the water coming out of the hose pipe. Remember, the water's moving forwards, but if I angle it like that, there's an upward motion, and the combination of the upward motion and the forward motion gives me the parabola. And if I make it go forwards faster, it'll go further. If I can, without getting myself wet, I shall try and make it come out faster. It's going further, and if I angle it, still the parabola shape, but going further because the horizontal motion, the wind is blowing it back, the horizontal motion is carrying it forwards further. If I send it slower, it just comes to here. If I send it faster, it comes to there. And of course, the next bit of projectile motion that I'm going to show you, people are very skilled at working out how fast to send the arrow and what angle to hold the bow in order to make an arrow hit the target. And we'll go and look at a little bit of archery, because that's projectile motion too. Thanks to Tubber Car Wash for your hose pipe, and we'll just look at a faster hose pipe, the sort that's used to wash a car, and see the water's coming out faster, so it goes much further. You don't see the shape quite so well because the wind disperses the water at the end. So thank you to Tubber Car Wash, here in the middle of Tubber, rapidly growing with lots of new blocks of flats coming up. Thank you for letting us have a look at your water jet, which normally is used to clean motor cars.
Tour by the time. Maybe that's good enough. Jeez. Where's the fire truck?